Hey y'all, it's Nancy the Handy Scandy here with Whimsy Stamps. This video is going live on the 4th of July 2022, so I wish you all a happy Independence Day, and I hope everybody is having a good time, getting some sun, being with friends and family as we support and celebrate our nation's birth. Despite everything that's going on, we still live in a great country. So I am making this fun vintage / Americana / primitive Stars and Stripes card. No sentiment on it at all, and that's just the way I wanted it. So I start out by using this beautiful vintage wallpaper background stamp, of course from Whimsy, and it's just beautiful. It's one of my favorite stamps from Whimsy, and it is the only stamp that I use on this entire card. So I have this piece of red scrap paper, and I used some white pigment ink. I believe mine is from Brutus Monroe, if I'm not mistaken. And then I have this beautiful white satin pearl embossing powder. Now I use this embossing powder on all of the pieces for this card, and it'll make sense as we go. I had to show the embossing because does it ever get old? It doesn't for me. I mean, it's so satisfying and so pretty. And I love this white satin pearl because it allows the color of the cardstock that you're using it on to shine through, but it still gives that soft white hint, if you will. Now I use the same on the blue, and then on the white panel with the blue ink and the white panel with the red ink, I use those colors of inks, but I still use the same embossing powder. Now here I have the wavy striped edgers and then I have the smallest star from the primitive shaker shapes. And of course I just went over to my die cutting machine and I cut everything out the way I wanted it. Now if y'all know me, you know that I didn't really plan. So I'm really happy that the stripes line up as good as they do, because it could have been a really big mishap. I still would have tried to make it work in some way, but yeah, you see how they're not quite lined up on the ends, but it works out for us, so it's not a big deal. So here I'm just kind of auditioning everything, trying to get a direction in my head, figure out exactly how many pieces I need. Now this blue piece, of course you can see that it has the most expansive color for any of the pieces that I use, and I like this direction. I kind of had it in my head already, but I just wanted to put it together and make sure. So now that I have that direction, then I pull out my vintage photo and I'm giving a little bit of the distressing and kind of the wear and tear, if you will, on the edges to make it look old and worn and primitive. I love primitive decor, it's just fun. It's a piece of Americana from a time in America that is just kind of, I don't know, in some ways it was more wholesome, in other ways maybe not so much, but in terms of the decor, I love it. So I have a little bit of vintage photo distressing on every single piece, and here I'm gluing all my pieces down to the card panel, and I'm making sure that I nestle each one of those stripes real snug and tight up against the next so that there's no gapping. And then I come in just a little bit and I buff off all the ink from the embossed images, because I really only want that the vintage photo ink on the cardstock versus the images. So it's just a little emboss resist, really, is what it turns out to be. So I have everything laid down, everything right where I want it, and you can see that the red on the left and then the white on the right side of the panel, they just don't quite line up. And I knew that I was going to trim it down, so I did. I went over to my die cut machine again, and this time I used the largest of the sprinkles frames, and then I cut out a really nice edge on that, and I'm just picking off any kind of stray. You know how sometimes you'll get those little fuzzy pieces when you do die cutting? Had a couple of those. So you can see that I just went in again all around the edges with my vintage photo, just to add another layer of that vintage primitive Americana look. And then here I'm kind of changing directions with my stars. Just decided that I wanted the stars to kind of intersect the border between the blue, where the stars go, and then the red and white stripes. And so I added a fifth star, did a little bit more of the vintage photo ink blending on it, and then here we go. So a reroute, so it's the same direction, just going a different route. And then I glue this whole panel onto my card base, and it's taken a while to adhere because it's pretty thick. The card panel is pretty thick. So off screen, I actually ended up putting it up under my laptop to hold it in place. So if you saw in the beginning, I did the distressing on 4 of the stars. So I went back and I did it on the 5th as well, so they all are the same and they all look very vintagey. And then I have these little triangles of double-sided foam tape. I'm lifting every one of these stars up, so that was a little bit tedious, so I didn't show the whole process. I usually don't, but that's the only dimension on this card, and I'm just having a good time. Like, it's coming together quite easily. So I just wanted to go back and say that this vintage background, or vintage wallpaper background, like I said in the beginning, it's just one of my favorites, and I wanted it to have that more vintage look. So when you saw me take the towel to the stamp at the very beginning, that's because I wanted to lift up some of that ink. I didn't want it to be even, and you can see that it's not. So there are some places, especially on the blue panel, that have a little more ink, a little more embossing than others, and it's kind of worn off, if you will, on some others. And so when I was inspecting my card at the end, I decided, yep, we have to have some splatter. So I pulled out my Posca pen. I've got some black, some brown, and then I bring in some white as well. And I just make these fun splatters all over everything. And I think it just brings the card together. Now, if you've been stamping for any amount of time and you've done a lot of primitive or vintage or Americana stuff, you know that we used to like the little tiny dots, and we would call it fly speck. In fact, I even have an old stamp that's a fly speck stamp, and that shows how long, I guess, that I've been stamping. So anyway, I just decided against any bling or buttons or twine. I just thought that the splatters did the final touch. So guys, this has been Nancy, the Handy Scandy for Whimsy Stamps. I invite you to join us over on our Facebook group as well as our other social media platforms. And if you're interested in shopping or checking out any of these products, everything is linked and listed downstairs. So until next time, mwah, happy 4th of July, and I'm out.